Welcome to CYF Spotlight, presented by the Commission on Children, Youth, and Families. The Commission is a joint effort between the City of Farmington Hills and the City of Farmington. Its purpose is to foster a healthier community by focusing on our most precious resources, our children and our families. The Commission is made up of dedicated volunteers and community activists from all walks of life. Working together with other groups and agencies in the community, the Commission creates programs with one goal: to encourage a supportive environment where children, youth, and families are happy, healthy, educated, and safe, and have the opportunity to reach their full potential. The Commission is hosting this show to bring our focus and activities to the community. We welcome your input and support. You can learn more about our Commission at our website, www.cyf.us. In 1990, the FDA started requiring food labeling for most prepared foods, such as bread, cereal, canned and frozen foods, snacks, and desserts and drinks. The nutrition facts label currently appears on more than 6.5 billion food packages. On today's CYF Spotlight, we have Annie House, a registered dietitian at Botsford Hospital, with us. Annie's going to help us interpret and better understand what food labels mean. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming.
Really happy to be here.
So explain to me a little bit about your expertise. You're a registered dietitian. What does that mean?
Sure. A registered dietitian is a health professional, a nutrition and foods expert or professional. And we work in various areas. You'll find dietitians in schools, community health centers, community health departments, hospitals. Mm-hmm. I myself work in an outpatient diabetes and nutrition services facility. So we see people who are discharged from the hospital and just have questions about general nutrition and want to eat healthy.
Great. So you really guide people in the choices they make of what to eat, because that does impact our health greatly.
Yeah.
In so many ways. So I think we all could have a resident dietitian at home just to say, buy this, don't buy that, eat this, don't eat that, right?
Wouldn't that be nice? If
Keep
you
you
talk
in
to
our
my
back
husband,
pocket.
he might not agree with you, but yes, that's true.
So we know that legally the government requires food labeling, probably for a lot of liability reasons too, so companies can be disclosing what they're putting in their foods. Why is it important from a health perspective to have food labels?
Sure. Well, food labels can help make us informed consumers, so that we know exactly what's in the product. But we can also look at specific nutrients, the quantity of those nutrients, ones that we want to have more of, also ones that we want to limit in our diet. Sure. Also gives us a standard serving, so that can help us to build appropriate portions in our own meal plans.
Well, that is so important, not just what we eat, but how much of it.
Right.
So even if you're eating fruit and vegetables, if you eat a ton of it, it can be damaging.
Yeah, that's true.
So let's talk a little bit about the information that appears on our food labels, and then we're going to examine a food label and interpret that for viewers today.
Right.
So in general, what kind of information is usually included on a food label?
Well, again, like I mentioned, specific nutrient data, so what we call macronutrients like carbohydrate and fat and protein, those are going to be listed, as well as some of just the general vitamins and minerals that are a part of a healthy diet. So vitamins A, vitamin C, fiber will be listed, as well as calcium and iron, because we know those are part of a healthy diet, and that the U.S. often tends to have a lower intake of those vitamins.
Okay.
So it's a way to encourage the consumption of those.
Okay. So it would be great for people to educate themselves on what exactly they need to put in their diet in terms of vitamins and minerals and nutrients. But let's take a look at the food label. And I love what you said about being an educated consumer, because that serving size, that's an important piece of information. We can start up there, right? We have a food label right before us. Sometimes when you get a big drink and it says serving size 2 in the bottle, and people think this is one serving, so they look at everything, they miss that serving size part, right?
Yes, it is. It's always the first thing that you should look at on a food label, because it dictates everything else that's listed. And I think the important part, again, is being able to know the difference between a serving and a portion, right?
Okay.
The good thing about a serving is that it's always standardized. You know, we can look at the nutrition fact label and it will tell us the serving size is 1 cup.
Right,
and then
which might be the size of a fist or something.
Yeah, that's a good a good comparison. And again, the same kind of thing. If you don't have a nutrition fact label, you can use things like that. You can say, okay, well, I don't have my measuring cups with me, but this is about the size of my fist, so it's about 1 cup. And again, you're giving yourself a standard
Sure.
that you can use to build an appropriate portion. The benefit with the food label is it's there for you.
Sure.
You just have to be able to say, okay, 1 cup is the appropriate amount for me,
Right.
so I'm going to have 1 cup, or maybe, you know, I could get away with a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and do 2 cups.
Right.
Or on certain labels, I'll tell people you really want to be careful because the recommended serving size might be more than what you'd want to make for yourself. You know,
interesting.
certain high-fat foods are like that. So
Interesting.
it's always important to look at the serving size first.
And so on this label, it says serving size is a cup. So all the information here refers to 1 cup portion, but servings per container would be 2.5. So if somebody, whatever this label was for, if they were to eat the whole container, it would be 2.5 times all of these numbers.
Yes, you
right?
multiply everything by 2.5. Yes.
Okay, so
including the percent daily values.
Absolutely. And so we have to think of that in our whole day of eating and how does this factor in.
Right.
Right? Okay, so then we get to calories. And I think we all use that word all the time, but I'm not sure we know what it means. So
Right.
what is a calorie and how do we understand that?
Calorie is energy, right?
Okay.
And generally where those calories are coming from, as far as processed foods or packaged foods, are coming from those macronutrients that I mentioned before. Carbohydrate, protein, fat, all provide calories.
Okay.
And if we get into the numbers of it, for every gram of protein that you eat, it's going to provide 4 calories.
Okay.
Every gram of carbohydrate, same, 4 calories.
Okay.
And then with fat, for every gram of fat, it's 9 calories. So it's over double, which is why the serving sizes for fat often tend to be a lot smaller.
Oh, sure.
And by decreasing some of the fat in your diet or your intake, you can be pretty successful at losing weight or decreasing a lot of calories without necessarily getting rid of a lot of food because
Sure.
it's such a calorie dense type of food. But we know, I think everybody's pretty comfortable with the basic idea of if you eat more calories than you expend through the course of the day, that energy is going to be stored up and you're going to gain weight.
Right.
If the calorie level is about the same that you take in, that you expend in the day, you maintain weight.
Right.
And then if your goal is to lose weight, you have to find a way to make the
less and
calorie
move
deficit.
more.
Yes.
And that's important too. When people are looking to lose weight, it is that combination of what you eat, how much you eat, and then how much you exercise
Right.
and what type of exercise too, which is a whole other conversation. So,
Yes.
so we get to fat, and that has been a huge conversation in this country for probably the past decade or two. I know that one thing we don't want to get too much into, but labels can be misleading because when it says no fat, sometimes that means it's more sugars or they compensate in different areas. And so it's important to look at that whole label, isn't it, to understand the big picture of what you're about to eat.
Yeah, it's easy to kind of pinpoint specific nutrients and say, okay, well, I'm watching my blood pressure, so all I'm looking at is the sodium on the label. Or same thing, I want to lose weight, so I'm going to concentrate on the fat. But the problem with that is we want food to taste good, right? So oftentimes they are taking something out and putting something else back in. So you do have to look at the food label as a whole to get the big picture of the food. And the same thing, you know, the FDA requires things like total fat to be, if you've got 0 grams, there's still a little bit of leeway in there. There could be less than 0.5 grams. It's going to be listed as 0.
Okay.
So looking at the ingredient list is important too.
Okay. So total fat and saturated fat, and some fats are good for you, some fats are not. So explain the total fat, saturated fat conversation there.
Sure. In total fat, we have monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, saturated fats, and then trans fats. You're not always going to see them listed on the label, although sometimes you will see all of them listed.
Okay.
But the ones that are generally required are saturated fat and trans fat.
Okay.
Goal would be to make the trans fat and the saturated fat less than 1/3 of the total fat.
Okay.
So when we're looking at fats, good fats, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated fats.
What are some examples of foods with the good fats?
Those are going to be things that tip off as liquid at room temperature.
Okay.
But
So like
canola
olive
oil, olive oil, sesame oil are all good monounsaturated fats. Walnuts would be a good example of a polyunsaturated fat, or we hear a lot about. Yeah, avocado is a great source of a monounsaturated fat.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But things like fish, omega-3 fatty acids, omega-6 fatty acids, those are polyunsaturated fats. So
those are good.
Good types of fats.
And some bad fats?
Yeah, again, saturated would be something that would be solid at room temperature.
So butter,
Butter,
margarine.
yep, animal fats essentially. Butter specifically. Margarine's oftentimes a blend of polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats, but lard, bacon, sour cream, cream cheese, all good examples of saturated fat.
Okay, good. One thing also we should understand is the percent daily value. And what does that mean? Is that how much is recommended in a day, or the percentage of what you should have in a day?
Yeah, it's a daily recommendation for a average 2,000 calorie diet. So we have specific standards for the amount of macronutrients, the protein, carbohydrate, and fat, as well as just recommended daily allowances for some of the vitamins and minerals. And they take those, make them percentages of the quantity of that specific nutrient, and it becomes a part of the general recommendation. So you can use those as a basic guide. If you see something that has 5% or less, that's low. So we'd want something to be low in the listing of fat or sodium, for instance.
Sodium can be a biggie with a lot of packaged foods because that's a preservative that keeps it packaged and from spoiling. I've seen a lot of packages where it'll say, this one says 55 milligrams, but it'll say 900 milligrams, and it says 50% daily value, and I'm like, that sounds really bad. I don't know what it means, but I don't think I want to eat it, right?
It's true. There are foods that would surprise you that are so high in sodium, and it's interesting to me because I'll have a lot of people mention to me that, well, I don't use my salt shaker. And if you knew the percentage of sodium that we get from the salt shaker that we use compared to what's in the processed foods that we eat, there's no comparison. So we really have to be conscious looking at labels for sodium content. My general rule of thumb is if it's a side dish, should have less than 400 milligrams of sodium. If it is an entree, it should have less than 800 milligrams. And those are still pretty generous, really. Yeah,
that's pretty high.
But that's based on the daily recommendation of 2,400 milligrams. If someone has hypertension or they've been told to kind of be careful with the sodium, restrict it a little bit, then they should get closer to 2,000 or 1,600 milligrams. And then, of course, you'll see those 800 and 400 recommendations come down a little bit.
And then we skipped over cholesterol. Talk to me about that.
Sure. The general recommendation would be no more than 300 milligrams of cholesterol through the course of the day. We know now that it's not so much the cholesterol that's in the food that's raising people's LDL cholesterol. It's a bad type of cholesterol. It's really the saturated fat and the trans fat that's in food. So if you're looking at the total fat, the saturated fat, and the trans fat, you don't have to spend quite as much time looking at the cholesterol level.
Okay. And then we move down to total carbohydrates, dietary fiber, and sugars. So the total carbohydrate means all the carbs that are in the product, and then it breaks it down to the fiber and the sugars, right?
Yeah.
So what we hear also, no carb, low carb, all that, what are we talking with carbohydrates?
Yeah, the key with carbohydrates really is to choose quality, complex types of carbohydrates. So when we say that, it's choosing whole grains. Right? Fruits have a sugar called fructose in them, right? That's a quality type of carbohydrate. It's a good type of carbohydrate. Things that are higher in fiber. So again, when we're looking at starches, potatoes would be a source of carbohydrate. How do you make a potato more complex? Well, you eat it with the peel, right? There are ways to increase the fiber in certain vegetables that we eat as well. So looking at the total carbohydrate as a whole, the key is just making sure that you're getting a whole grain type of carbohydrate or quality complex type.
And then we get to protein. And how do we describe what protein is?
Good question. I always say that protein belongs at the bottom of the food label just because as a society we generally get the amount of protein that we need. But the key with protein is making sure that you're choosing lean types of protein when it comes to meat. So listen for words like round, flank, loin. Those are going to be leaner types of meat. Or if you're looking at a label on a meat product, oftentimes ground meats will have a label on them or processed meats. Lean means something that has less than 3 grams of fat per ounce. So a 3-ounce portion should have, or 3-ounce serving, if it's on the label, should have less than 9 grams of fat, and then it becomes a lean meat or a good choice. You can do the same thing with protein supplements or protein bars. Well, how does this work in my diet?
Right.
We know that 1 ounce of meat is equivalent to about 7 grams of protein.
Okay.
So you'd want to find a protein bar that's going to have at least 14 grams of protein so that it helps keep you full. That's one of the benefits of protein. It's something that keeps you full as well as fiber. It takes longer to digest.
And some packaged foods that might have protein on the label are beans and legumes,
Absolutely.
Things, even nuts. Those are non-animal sources of proteins too.
Yes.
So it's not just meat; it's in a lot of things.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
And then we have vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, iron, all things that we need. And what can we say about those?
Well, vitamins A, vitamin C are antioxidants. They're very important for our health. So when you see those daily recommended or percentages, the daily values, want to get those nice and high. You can see on our label the vitamin A content there is 360%. So
this is from carrot juice, right?
Great source of vitamin A, which is very healthy for our eyes, and vitamin C for our immune health. And then calcium and iron, we know again calcium is great for bone health, very important. You find that in a lot of dairy products. And iron helps with our hemoglobin, our blood, absolutely. So our energy levels are dependent on our iron levels.
And so the goal is to get a mix of all the good things and to keep low the bad things, right?
Yes.
So we've looked at the food label. We're going to talk a little bit about ingredient labels and eating out. And one thing I just wanted to sort of circle back to that we were talking about a little bit off camera is that the food label is on packaged goods. But there are lots of things for which we have no food label, right?
Yes.
So just like shopping the perimeter of the grocery store, fruits, vegetables, meats, fish, all that kind of stuff, you probably won't find any of these nutrition facts, but they're loaded, right?
It's interesting to think, isn't it, that the nutrition food label isn't on the predominant amount of foods that we should be eating.
It's true.
Right.
It's really
and
true.
The key there is, again, shopping around the perimeter, choosing foods that are more whole, that are more raw, the less processed really, the better. And by choosing fresh produce and, again, talking about whole grains, the closer that you can get to nature with a lot of these foods, it's better. Less additives.
Right, and it's a great transition to talking about the ingredient list because I've always been taught that the fewer ingredients, the better the choice. So if you have a list of 20 ingredients on there and you can't even read some of them because they're so long.
You can pronounce the ingredients.
Right, then that may not be a good choice. So talk to us a little bit about how you can understand an ingredient list and what to look for. Are there certain ingredients right off the bat that you see that and you say, not going to get this?
Sure. Well, when you're looking for healthier foods, grains, for instance, the first word that you should be looking for is whole.
Okay.
When an ingredient list is listed by the amount of that ingredient in the food. So
the first ingredient
is always going to be the largest component.
Okay.
So if the first ingredient listed is something like sugar or high fructose corn syrup, there's your tip off that it's not the healthiest type of food and that it's discretionary calories. It's not that you can never have those kind of things. It's just they're occasional kind of foods.
Sure.
So the healthier foods are going to be the ones that have the first ingredients listed as more whole types of foods and healthier options. But just like you said, if you've got a list of what looks like 50 ingredients and the bottom part of that are words that you can't even pronounce, you know that there are a lot of additives, a lot of preservatives in that food, and that it's probably not as healthy of an option.
Okay. The other thing that I learned, which I thought was really interesting, is that there are lots of different code words for sugar. So especially when I'm trying to buy cereals for my kids, which is really overwhelming because there's a huge long aisle of it. And then I think, how many of these can I actually choose without sending them to school on a diet of sugar?
Right. Sucrose, high fructose corn syrup, fructose, glucose, absolutely.
It's amazing. I think there are some that might have 5 kinds of sugar in the first 5 ingredients.
Yeah.
And how we don't even realize that unless we do the research, right?
And I think a lot of times we don't necessarily catch the sugar substitutes that they put in there too, and some people are more sensitive to those. So, I've even been surprised. This tastes a little bit sweet, and it's maybe a box of cereal that looks like it's unsweetened because it doesn't have sugar in it. And then when I look, no, there's the sucralose or the
and it's
aspartame.
chemical, so
so you really can't just look at the nutrition fact label, it's important to look at the ingredient list as well.
Now, we have so many cases of allergies nowadays, food allergies, especially in schools. So when we're reading labels, are there any little code words or things we need to look for that clue us in that maybe we think it's not an allergen, but maybe it's lurking inside?
Yeah. Again, everything has to be listed in the ingredient list.
Okay.
So it's helpful for people who have food allergies, and depending on the food allergy, especially if someone has a lot of food allergies, it's valuable to see a registered dietitian or a specialist who can give you a list of those words that you're looking for, because a peanut allergy isn't just peanuts, right? There could be oils that are used in the food where it could still cause an allergic reaction.
Sure. Okay. Also, I would love to get your insight on eating in restaurants.
Sure.
So I guess maybe how can we make healthy choices in a restaurant, either from looking at certain keywords on a menu or knowing how to have something cooked?
Yeah. Some restaurants actually have their nutrition information available, and that's really nice. You can go on their website ahead of time, or sometimes they'll even have it listed in their menu, or they'll have a separate section with options that are a little bit lower, and they'll give you the calories and the fat in those. So that can be helpful, and if you have the option to know what's in the food ahead of time, that's the best way to go. But if you don't, then you look for certain buzzwords, right? Things that have a low-fat cooking method, baked or broiled or roasted, grilled. Those are all leaner types of cooking methods, so they're not adding extra fat.
So saute is not a good one.
Yeah, so if you see saute with a lot of butter, we know
that's code for fried.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, fried. The same thing. Crunchy, deep fried,
coating.
cheesy. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. All those tend to mean a lot of extra fat, and we underestimate the calories a lot when we're going out to eat. That's something to keep in mind too. We think, oh, this isn't so bad. You could go to a restaurant and get 4 times the amount of pasta that an appropriate portion size should be. And we think we're doing really good by splitting that portion in half and bringing half home, but we've still had double what we should have had in the first place. And then by the time they've added that buttery sauce on top, the calories are sky high. So keep in mind cooking method. Make sure, if it's something that could be modified, ask. A lot of restaurants are really happy to do that for you. They want you to come back. So if you ask for your salad dressing on the side, that's going to make a big difference. The key is gaining the control back, right? They want it to taste as good as it possibly can. They don't care how much extra they're adding or if they're heavy-handed with certain things. When you have the control back at the table, you can make the choice as far as how much of the high-fat extras that you're using.
And high salt. There's a lot of salt in restaurant food.
Yeah.
There are certain kinds of restaurants that have more healthy options than others. Are there certain restaurants to look for if you're in a new town or something and you think, well, what's the healthiest place that's available?
Sure. Restaurants that tend to serve more fresh food options would be better choices. So we were talking earlier, things like Japanese restaurants or Mediterranean restaurants, which there tends to be a lot of in our Metro Detroit
Middle
area.
Eastern, so many vegetables and healthy options.
So those are pretty good choices. You can make healthy food choices just about any restaurant that you go to.
Even in one that you can drive through?
Well, yeah, again, sodium levels tend to be high there too.
But they have salads and they have juices and things like that.
And keep smaller serving size. The key there again is that if you're ordering the largest burgers and the largest fries
and a big milkshake, it might taste really good, but you'll feel it later.
Yeah, exactly. 2,000 calories later, you think, oh, wait a minute.
That's just the milkshake. Right. Well, this is so helpful. I feel like I really understand the food label better. I still think it's really daunting, which I'm sure a lot of consumers do. But the ingredient advice is really helpful too, because maybe that's one place to start, just understanding what's in our food. So armed with knowledge, we can make better choices. Yeah. Thank you. Is there anything we haven't covered that's really important for consumers to know?
I think we covered a lot. Really, the key is personalizing the food label for yourself. If you have a specific chronic disease condition or you just want to maintain a healthy diet, look at the nutrition facts and say, well, what is it that I'm looking for specifically, and how does this fit into my meal planning?
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here. You brought a wealth of knowledge, and I know that I'll be a smarter shopper after this.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching the show.